Welcome. You are listening to the podcast Father Ed Talks. Hi there, and welcome to the very first episode of my podcast, brand new podcast, Father Ed Talks, with me, your host, Edward. It's so good to welcome you all here today, wherever you might be. So, I was just wondering how many people remember the 2011 census in the UK. Well, after that came out, the noted atheist author, Professor Richard Dawkins, championed Wales in the United Kingdom. He said that Wales was far above the rest of the UK and many other countries in being one of the most atheist countries. In that 2011 census, up to 32% of people said that they had no religion. So why on earth would someone in that context want to be a priest? Welcome to episode 1 of Father Ed Talks, and in this episode I'm going to talk about why I decided to become a priest. My hope for this episode is that in my discussion about why I decided to become a priest, my hope is that you are going to be able to learn a little bit more about me. Just to say that today's podcast won't be talking so much about what a priest does, but rather my journey to it. So the church uses a lot of fancy terminology to describe really basic stuff, and one of those words is vocation, a vocation journey, and the word is meant to describe a sense of calling within someone to a particular lifestyle, a particular way of life. And this is something that is certainly not unique to the clergy, to the church. So many friends of mine talk about their sense of calling in being a doctor, a nurse, in being a teacher, where they feel that kind of magnetic pull almost in them to live this kind of life, that the work that they end up doing, whether it be a healthcare professional, whatever it may be, it's somehow a fulfillment of the person that they are. The realization that this is what they're meant to do, really, with their life. So today, I hoped that I could talk to you about my journey to why I decided to do vicaring, basically. So I hope it's okay. So if you'd like to grab a glass of wine, my preference is wine, a bag of crisps or something, and sit back and enjoy. So I mentioned Wales a little bit earlier, but my journey started in South Africa. Some of you will know that I was born in South Africa and grew up there. I was 16 when I came over here to the UK. Growing up in South Africa was a very, very different context. It was, as you can imagine, a very different place to be for so many reasons. And particularly as a religious person, a person of faith, growing up in South Africa was really quite different, and I'm going to explain how and why. So the Anglican Church in South Africa, or if we can think of the Church of England, but in South Africa, or the Church in Wales, basically the church that Henry VIII founded when he wanted to divorce his wife back in the 1500s. So the Anglican Church became very much the face of, at least the Christian face, fighting against the apartheid system, fighting for liberation. For those of you who are not too sure what the apartheid system was, this was a system of racial segregation in South Africa during the years 1948 to 1994. So one of my heroes, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, became it was his refusal to accept the status quo. He was very inspirational in encouraging people to stand up to this oppressive apartheid system. And because of that, the Anglican Church became very well attended because people saw in the Archbishop so much strength, so much courage, and so much character. And his personality is just so wonderfully infectious. We want to listen to the Archbishop because he's so inspirational, and because of that, the Anglican Church became really well attended. I was a little boy who was raised Christian. My mum and dad taught me to believe in God and that God loves me exactly as I am. And that was really wonderful. And as a family, we went to church on a Sunday. It was something normal. It was something, everybody does this kind of thing. And so, to my mind, I was someone who would go to church on a Sunday, would pray, and I would have considered that in South Africa to be normal. And I'm quite careful about the use of that word normal, because, well, who's to say what's normal? But particularly in that context, if you were a person of faith, if you were religious, whether it be Christian or otherwise, that was the norm. And looking back on my time there in South Africa, there were two occasions that really made me think about what I was going to do with my life. And the first happened when I was 10 years old, and I was prone to getting ear infections, unfortunately. And I ended up having a lot of grommets put and fitted into my ear to drain that infection. Excuse me, sorry for being gross. My bad. But yes, so this happened again when I was 10 in my right ear. So with my mum and dad, we went to go and see our family doctor to check what was going on in my ears, and he said, unfortunately, I'm going to need more grommets, and this was on that Friday afternoon. And he said, on Monday, you'll need to come in, and we will perform the operation, and we'll try and clear the infection. So that Sunday, as normal, we decided to go to church, and I remember my dad asking me, would you like to go and ask one of the priests to pray for you in preparation for your operation? And I said, yeah, sure, that sounds like a nice idea. And we went to go and see one of the priests, and he laid his hands on both my ears, and he prayed for God's blessing and for God's healing and comfort, that everything would be okay. In that moment, I felt this rush of warmth going through my head, through my body, and it was a very, very odd feeling, and but a comforting one. And I remember crying. I just felt really overwhelmed at that moment. It was strange, and that was it. The service came to, the service finished, and we went home. And on the Monday, we returned to see the doctor. And before he, sent me for the operation, he said, I'll just quickly assess where we are with this infection and see what's happened. And he examined my ears again, and he said, I can't believe it. The infection has gone. He said, genuinely, there is no evidence of any kind of infection here, and you don't need grommets anymore. And he said, I just can't believe it. Because on Friday, it was here, and you needed this operation, and on Monday, it had gone completely. Now, of course, I mean, that could have just been a clear coincidence. It could have just been something that happened. But to his mind, he said you needed grommets, you needed an operation to get this sorted out, and that was the Friday. And on the Monday, he could not understand what had happened and why the infection had gone. I think thinking back to that, I mean, being 10, I don't think I was really aware of what was going on. But looking back, for me, I think that was a very clear moment in my life where I believe, and again, I'm speaking personally here, but I believe that God was working for good in my life there. I felt that God's presence and strength and love was a reality for me, particularly in those moments. I never really thought much about that after that growing up. And in terms of a career, I wanted to be a football player. I genuinely wanted to be a football player, and also I wanted to be a Formula One driver. And to do these things at the same time, honestly, I I did not believe that there would be any kind of clash. So that was that was the decision. That's what I was going to do. Until one day when I was 14 years old and watching television, and I remember my eyes being drawn to a family Bible that we happened to have. It belonged to my grandfather who'd passed away a few years before. And I remember looking at that Bible, and suddenly a thought came to me, and it was very strange because it was my thought, and yet at the same time, it wasn't my thought. Do you know how when you are dreaming and you're very aware that, for example, the house that you're in is your house, but it's not your house? So it was that same kind of feeling. This was my thought, but it felt like it wasn't. And the voice said, "Why don't you become a priest?" And all of a sudden, it felt like everything suddenly made sense. The ambition of being a football player and a Formula One driver kind of went out the window, and it made sense to me. It was a moment of real clarity, and I spoke earlier about that magnetic pull that many of us feel to a particular profession. Well, this was the same feeling in that moment. I felt a real strong resonance. I could see myself in the priests that I knew, and I could see them in me. As I say, I had this real strong resonance. So from that moment, I felt that this was what I was supposed to do. I had that magnetic pull towards doing this work. And from that moment, I didn't look back. And it wasn't until we moved to the UK that things started to really develop. But before we did move to the UK, a couple of things happened. I actually remember the dates. The 6th of August 2004. I wonder where you were. I was coming home from school, and I remember seeing we had 4 dogs, and 3 of them we had a front garden, and 3 of them were in the front garden. Um, and I remember coming home and seeing the one little dog lying down on the ground. And I thought, oh, that's a bit odd. It's like kind of like snoozing in the sun. It wasn't something that our little dogs used to do. And sadly, on when I got closer to our little dog, I realized that she was dead, and she'd been poisoned. All 3 of them were dead at the same time. It couldn't have been anything else. And just real shock. Like, why would anyone do this? And it wasn't until the vet came a bit later that afternoon to collect the bodies of our dogs that he said to us, he pointed at my mother's car, and he said, "They want that car. Those guys who did this, they want that car." And I don't think I gave that really a second thought, but you'll see in a moment exactly what he meant. So on the 24th of September that year, so about 6 weeks later, my mother and I were leaving the house, and we were reversing out of the driveway. And as we did, 2 men appeared either side of the car with guns. And they tapped on the window and said, open up. In South Africa, experiencing something like that is actually, believe it or not, quite common. And the only thought that was running through my head was not so much, well, why us? And I can't believe this is happening. But it was more, okay, it's our turn, and we just need to cooperate, and it'll be over. Looking back, I think we were actually really lucky in those moments, because genuinely I believe that the guys who were taking our stuff and our car were more afraid than we were. I don't think they were very well practiced at what they were doing. It wasn't until I actually looked the guy on my side in the face that he said to me, "Give me your phone, give me your wallet, give me your watch." He hadn't said anything until that moment. It was the guy on my mother's side that was telling us what to do. And then, what seemed like an age for us, but had to be like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. We were out the car and they were driving away. And I think do you know what? It still affects me today. It still affects me. And in that moment, it took me and my family a long time to recover. There's always this feeling of unease and being frightened for your safety in South Africa. Um, and yeah, as I say, it's that kind of thing still affects me. But there you go. Once we got back in the house, my father said, "That's it. We're going to try and move. We have to do everything we can to try and move to the UK because we want to feel safe." My father was born in London, and he always said with my mother that they wanted me to experience life in the UK and to for us to move back to where his family are from. And it wasn't until 2006 that we arrived back in the UK and I had my first real experience of Christianity in the UK. A little bit about what Richard Dawkins was talking about. So, as I mentioned before, being an Anglican in South Africa was something that was quite popular. And genuinely, for a main service in South Africa, you could get 250 to 300 people at any given main service. And, even if people didn't have transport to get to church, people would walk for miles and miles to get there. And so the first Sunday that my parents and I went to church, which is what we normally did, so we went to the city centre church in Cardiff. And I remember arriving, and this was the main service on a Sunday. And so I was expecting the same thing as in South Africa. Well, for the place to be heaving, really. um, and that wasn't quite what happened on that day. I remember sitting there, 16 years old, and there must have been about 15, that's 1-5, people there, 20 at the most. And I was so shocked. I couldn't believe that so few people were going to church. I actually sat there and cried. It sounds like I cry a lot, doesn't it? But I couldn't believe that there were just 15 people there. It was just so shocking. Wow. Um, so that was my first experience of church in the UK, something that was radically different, where the norm was that you weren't very religious, that you didn't tend to have a religious belief. But we eventually settled elsewhere in Cardiff, and we decided to attend their local church, like the one of those really pretty old buildings that you tend to see in most towns, villages, cities in the UK. And this church was better attended, and I remember we sat in the back. We kind of like wanted to keep ourselves to ourselves. And at the end of the service, the vicar came over and he, said, hello, my name is blah, blah, blah. Welcome, it's lovely to see you. You're new. We want to welcome you, etc., etc. Just all very nice, and I hadn't said anything to that point. And he looked at me and he said, you want to be a priest, don't you? I was shocked because I hadn't said anything. And I said to him, yes, how did you know that? How could you possibly have known that? And he said, I just had a feeling. And he said, well, if you'd like to discuss that, you're very welcome to come and see me, and I can talk you through how it will work. And so I went to see him, and the first thing he said was that I need to start reading up about what being a priest is. And so I had some very helpful books, and he also put me in touch with something called a vocations advisor. And this is a person who is meant to be someone who will help you figure out what on earth is going on. Why do you feel called to be a priest? And the idea is that they will sort of encourage you and help you along the right way. And I had some really good meetings with my vocations advisor, really helpful meetings. And he encouraged me to read more, to pray more, He encouraged me to consider what I might like to do at university. He said that I was very young. Of course, I was 16, 17 at that time. And he said, you need to focus on your A levels and all that sort of thing. So, after many conversations with him and over several years, I eventually decided to go and study theology, like study the Christian faith at university at Lampeter in West Wales. And that was mind blowing because we had some really fantastic lecturers, and I got to learn about all sorts of different things that I really never knew before. Things about the Bible, how the Bible came to be, church history, what happened in the past, and why Christians have ended up believing the things that they have, both the good things and the bad things. So eventually, whilst I was at Lampeter, I was put in touch with another person called the Director of Ordinance, and this is the official person who basically looks after you whilst you are training to be a priest. And through several conversations with them, I was eventually put forward for one of two selection panels. Now, it sounds really detailed and involved. It is, and I think the idea behind it is that the church are very keen for people to be absolutely sure, both ways, absolutely sure that they want to become a priest, but also absolutely sure that the church recognizes that God is calling this person to be a priest. So the selection panels, as I say, the first of two was an interview, and this was an interview with the bishop, who was kind of like the boss for all priests in a diocese, a particular geographical area. And the bishop isn't alone. There were three representatives and someone taking notes. And this was an hour and a half long, this interview. Really intense, but at the same time really encouraging, I found. And the first question was this. So, welcome, Edward. You've got 1 minute. Tell us about Edward. And I'm sure there was lots of I'm sure I did that. And but anyway, it actually turned out pretty well, and I was recommended by that panel to attend the second selection panel, which, surprise, surprise, was even more intense. This was a 3-day conference in Harden, in North Wales. I don't know if any of you have been to Harden in North Wales, but it's absolutely a beautiful place. So at this conference, you were put together with other people who were considering becoming priests. So you were all on the same path, as it were, and all on the same kind of stage in the journey. And we came from all sorts of different backgrounds. I was the youngest. At that stage, I was 22. But you had people in their 60s. You had people, all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of ages. And how it worked was a combination of interviews, one-to-one interviews, group discussions where you would have to chair and lead discussions, facilitate discussions, and also written exercises. And I felt like a goldfish because from the moment you arrive to the moment you leave, you are told that the selectors are watching. How do you conduct yourself? How do you behave? How do you communicate the Christian faith? And so yeah, it was quite intense, but really rewarding and a really good experience. And after that, I was selected to train to be a priest. So as you can see, this is a really long journey, isn't it? So I arrived in the UK in 2006, and it wasn't until 2016 that I was what we call ordained a deacon, so basically where I became a vicar. So that's 10 years of working things out. So yeah, it really is a long journey. Theological College was a fantastic place for me. I went to St Michael's Theological College, which is in Llandaff in Cardiff. And this was a brilliant experience. It's since been renamed. It still exists as a place. It's called St Padarn's Institute. and it does the same thing. It trains clergy to work in Wales. In my first year, I made so many good friends. I lived on site, and a lot of us were living on site. So we built a really good friendship group. And I remember on a Friday night, because I was the youngest, they would all pressure me to go and, on behalf of them, get their takeaway pizza from the Italian restaurants up the road. But little did they know that while I was waiting for their pizza orders, the manager of the business would always give me a free glass of wine. So I thought I won in that in that moment. So yeah, this was 3 years of intensive study, intensive reflection, working out, is this really right for me? Um, Now, I noticed that with all of the good food in theological college, that I started putting on a fair old chunk of weight, and I decided I'm going to need to work. I'm going to need to get rid of this, and but I also had an ulterior motive, and I'll come back to that in a second. So after my mother recommended, why don't you try ballroom dancing? She had done ballroom dancing years before, and she said you'll really enjoy it. Just go and give it a go. And I ended up joining the university team, the ballroom and Latin dancing team in Cardiff University. And you know, I can recommend this to any student who is going to any university in the UK. There probably will be some kind of dancing society, and I highly recommend it. I made the best friends and I had the best experiences. Not only did I end up losing some of that weight, but genuinely I made fantastic friends. Friends to this day who are my closest friends. So my ulterior motive was actually that I really wanted to meet someone. I just wasn't meeting anyone, and I knew that I didn't want to spend my life living alone. So I was really keen to go out and meet new people, experience new things, and enjoy life outside what was a really intense, but as I say, rewarding experience at theological college. And I ended up meeting my wife. We were partnered together by the university team captains. So big up to you guys. Thank you very, very much. And eventually our relationship blossomed out of that friendship, and eventually we were married. As I say, it was a really intense but really rewarding experience being at theological college. The 26th of June, 2016, shortly after the Brexit vote, um, I was ordained what we call a deacon, and so I was made a vicar. That pretty much is my journey up and until then. I really hope you've enjoyed listening. I've really enjoyed sharing the story with you all. And episode two, the subject of episode two will be uh, released on my Instagram very shortly. But I just wanted to thank you so much for listening. If you've listened to me rattle on, uh, to this moment, you're so kind. I just wanted to thank you so much for listening. And just to say that if you are new to this channel, please do consider hitting that subscribe button. You've listened to me up till now, so you might as well. And if you've enjoyed the video today, please do hit that like button on the video. But sincerely, thank you for joining me today. It's been so lovely to bring this to you. And keep your eyes peeled on my Instagram for episode two. Take care, everyone, and God bless.